taking advantage of another day to talk with you about a restlessness that stays with me, and that might be with you too. There's a type of emptiness that doesn't show up in medical diagnoses, that can't be resolved with rest or distraction. It's that emptiness of waking up every day, completing every task, responding to every message, showing up where you're expected, and still feeling that none of it really matters. You function, but you don't live. And nobody teaches you what to do when life simply stops making sense, when the script you were following loses its validity, and you're left there suspended without direction. Seneca lived in Rome over 2,000 years ago, surrounded by luxury and power, but he also knew exile, losses, and that same feeling of futility that reaches us today centuries later. Maybe that's why he developed such practical and honest tools for dealing with existential emptiness. In our last meeting, I brought Camus into the conversation. We talked about the absurdity of existence, about how life carries no intrinsic meaning and how we need to accept that and live anyway. Today I want to present you with another response to this same abyss, a response that doesn't deny the chaos but also doesn't settle for passive acceptance alone. While Camus looks at the absurd and says, "Accept that nothing has meaning and live anyway," Seneca looks at that same emptiness and asks, "But what are you doing with your time, with your energy, with the days you have?" The difference is subtle, but monumental. Camus frees you from the weight of seeking absolute, universal, cosmic meaning. Seneca teaches you to build relative, personal, sustainable meaning, something you can use as a compass day to day. He doesn't deny that the world is chaotic, that things don't have inherent significance, but he offers a Stoic way out. Reorganize life starting from what's under your control. And that transforms everything. Because it's one thing to accept the absurd and keep living despite it. It's something completely different to recognize that absurdity, look it in the face and decide, I can't control the chaos, but I can decide how I use my time within it. And it's at this crossroads that the difference lives between surviving and truly living, between existing and inhabiting your own life with presence and intention. Stoic philosophy doesn't promise easy answers, doesn't offer magical solutions, but it delivers something more valuable, a path to recover agency over your own existence. And when you start walking that path, when you start applying these tools in real life, something changes. Not dramatically, like in the movies, but deeply and lastingly. So let's go straight to the diagnosis that Seneca offers. He wrote a text called On the Brevity of Life, and right from the start, he presents an uncomfortable truth. He says that people don't live briefly, they waste most of their time. Life isn't short, we're the ones who treat it as if it were inexhaustible. And then comes the question that hurts. What are you filling your days with? Because many people live busy, exhausted, running from one commitment to another, but busy with what exactly? With obligations they didn't choose, with expectations that aren't theirs, with the life that others expect you to live. And then at the end of the day you collapse in bed, tired, but it's an empty tiredness, because nothing you did during the day really mattered to you. It didn't feed your soul, didn't bring you closer to who you want to be, didn't build anything worthwhile. It was just another wasted day. And when you realize you're wasting days after days, weeks after weeks, years after years, that feeling arises that life doesn't make sense. In fact, I left a reflection in the first pinned comment that dialogues with this feeling of displacement. Check it out when you can. But let's continue, because this is where understanding really begins to transform. But is the problem life, or is the problem that you're living the wrong life? Could it be that the emptiness you feel isn't the absence of meaning, but an excess of futility? Because there's a huge difference between these two things. Seneca is saying that before going out in search of purpose, meaning, life mission, you need to do a deep cleaning. You need to look at your routine and ask, what here is consuming me without giving me anything back? What am I doing just because I always have? Just because someone expects it? Just because I'm afraid to stop? And that's a scary question, because when you start answering honestly, when you really look at how your days are being spent, you realize that a good part of your life isn't yours. You're living on autopilot, fulfilling expectations, filling gaps that other people created, and in the middle of all that, you completely lost yourself. You became an executor of other people's tasks, a responder to external demands, but you stopped being the author of your own narrative. And this realization, as painful as it may be, is the first step toward transformation. Because you can't fix what you don't see. You can't change what you don't admit. You can't recover what you didn't even notice you lost. And maybe this is the most important moment of this entire conversation. The moment when you honestly look at your life and admit that something needs to change, that you can't continue like this, that this feeling of emptiness won't disappear on its own. And here comes a point that perhaps doesn't receive enough attention in contemporary discussion about meaning and purpose. Many people outsource their own existence without realizing it. You handed over control of your life to your boss, to the algorithms that decide what you see, to your family and their unspoken expectations, to your relationship and its needs, to social standards that determine how you should be, what you should achieve, how you should behave. And then you live responding, reacting, adjusting, but never really deciding. Seneca is radical on this point. He states that you can't live well if you're constantly responding to external demands. If your life is a sequence of responses to what others want from you, you're not living, you're being lived. And I know this might sound dramatic, maybe even exaggerated, but think with me for a moment. How many things do you do in your day because you really want to do them? And how many do you do because there would be unpleasant consequences if you didn't? How many yeses did you give in the last week that deep down were no's stuck in your throat? How many hours did you invest in activities that don't take you anywhere just because that's how it's done? That's how everyone does it. That's how it's always been done. And look, I'm not saying you need to abandon everything, isolate yourself from the world, flee from responsibilities, become a hermit in the mountains. But there's a huge difference between having responsibilities and being their slave. There's a profound difference between doing something because you need to and doing something because you completely lost the ability to refuse. Seneca teaches that freedom isn't doing what you want when you want. It isn't the absence of limits or obligations. Freedom is not being a slave to what you don't want. And that's too powerful to be ignored or treated as philosophical idealism. Because when you recover the ability to say no, when you return to consciously choosing where you invest your energy, something fundamental changes in your relationship with life. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become an active participant in your own story. And this doesn't solve all problems at once, doesn't make life magically make sense like magic, but it returns to you something essential, something you maybe didn't even know you had lost, the feeling that you're in command, even if it's commanding a small boat in an immense and chaotic ocean, even if you don't control the waves but can decide where to point the sail. And this feeling of agency, this ability to choose, is fundamental to any form of meaning you want to build. Because meaning without freedom isn't meaning, it's just disguised obedience. Now let's talk about one of the forces that most crushes people today, and that Seneca already understood deeply centuries ago: the tyranny of expectations. You know what I'm talking about? It's living under the invisible but constant weight of what should be. Should be happier, should earn more money, should have a perfect relationship, should be professionally fulfilled, should know exactly what you want from life, should have achieved more by this age, should be more productive, more balanced, more successful. These expectations, often unspoken, but always present, create constant pressure that completely removes the pleasure from anything you're experiencing, because nothing is ever enough. You're always falling short of the imaginary ideal. Something's always missing. There's always a next step you haven't reached yet. And then life loses meaning because you're measuring it with the wrong ruler. You're comparing your real existence, confused, full of contradictions and inevitable limitations, with a perfectly edited fantasy of how things should be. And obviously, in this impossible comparison, you always come out losing. Seneca says something that should be stamped everywhere, repeated until it becomes common sense. Most human suffering comes from desiring the impossible or from comparing one's own life with illusions. And social media amplified this in an absolutely absurd way. We see carefully edited snippets of people's lives. We see achievements without context. We see happiness without the backstage of doubt and effort. And then we look at our own life, with all its visible imperfections, and think we're failing miserably, but we're not. You're living a real life while comparing yourself to fictional, idealized, impossible versions of other lives, and that's deeply cruel. It's like playing a game where the rules constantly change and you can never really win, because the finish line moves away every time you get close. So what Seneca proposes is radical but absolutely necessary. Stop playing this game. Stop measuring your life by external standards that never asked what you really value. Stop expecting your existence to fit perfectly into molds that were created by people who don't even know you, who don't live your life, who don't carry your fears. And I know perfectly well that this is infinitely easier said than done, because these expectations are ingrained in you from the beginning. They came from your family, from school, from movies you watched, from conversations you heard in childhood, from the subtle and not so subtle messages you received about what it means to have a successful life. They're so deeply internalized that you don't even notice anymore that they're not yours. You genuinely think you want that, but actually, you just learned that you should want that. And separating what you really want from what you were taught to want is one of the hardest and most important jobs you can do in life. Because as long as you don't make that painful but liberating separation, you'll keep pursuing things that don't satisfy you. You'll keep reaching achievements that leave you strangely empty. You'll keep feeling that something is fundamentally wrong, even when everything seems right on paper, when you checked all the boxes of the socially approved script. And this dissonance between what you achieved and what you feel is one of the most common causes of the crisis of meaning that afflicts so many people today. And the Stoic response to this dilemma isn't complicated in theory, but requires immense courage in practice. Reduce, simplify, cut the excess without mercy. Seneca preaches voluntary simplicity, fewer unnecessary commitments, less mental noise, fewer people who drain energy without returning anything substantial. Recovering meaning isn't about adding more purpose to your already overloaded life. It isn't about finding a grandiose mission that will finally fill the void. It's about systematically removing what's suffocating clarity. Life gains unbearable weight when it's overloaded with empty obligations. It gains lightness and focus when it's consciously stripped of the unnecessary. And look, I'm not romanticizing poverty or preaching extreme minimalism as if it were a magical solution to all existential problems. I'm talking about something deeper and more personal. Looking without judgment, but with brutal honesty at your life, and asking what here really matters to me. Which relationships genuinely nourish me, and which just empty me? Which activities bring me closer to the person I want to be, and which just consume precious time? Which work is worthwhile, worth my vital energy, and which is just paying bills while slowly killing my soul? These are extremely hard questions. These are questions many people avoid their whole lives because the answers are deeply frightening. Because sometimes the answer is, I need to leave this relationship that's become toxic. I need to change careers, even without guarantees. I need to disappoint people who placed expectations on me that I never asked to carry. And making these changes requires facing paralyzing fear, crushing guilt, absolute uncertainty about the future. But Seneca would say without hesitation that the alternative is infinitely worse. The alternative is to keep accumulating empty obligations, keep living a life that isn't truly yours, keep waking up every day with that persistent feeling that something is fundamentally wrong, that you're wasting the only resource that really matters, your life. And I don't know about you, but to me that seems like a very slow, very painful and deeply tragic way to die. So maybe it's time to cut, to clean without mercy, to say no without apologizing, to create generous space so the essential can finally breathe, can manifest itself, can occupy the place it should have always occupied. And when you do this, when you really cut what no longer serves, you discover you had more space inside you than you imagined. You discover energy that was being wasted. You discover clarity that was being suffocated by constant noise. And this leads me directly to one of Seneca's central obsessions, time. He couldn't understand how people treat money and material goods with such meticulous care, but throw time away as if it were an infinite and renewable resource. You save money cautiously, you lock your house, you protect your belongings with alarms and insurance. But time you let anyone take freely. You give your precious time to abusive bosses who don't respect you, to completely empty conversations that lead nowhere, to infinite and hypnotic scrolling on social media, to social obligations that add absolutely nothing to your life. And time, unlike any other resource, is the only thing you really have. Money you can eventually recover, objects you can replace, opportunities can arise again. But time that's passed never comes back. Every hour you waste is literally an hour of your life that disappeared forever, that will never exist again, that you'll never be able to use any other way. And when life loses meaning, when you wake up with that emptiness in your chest, it's often because time is being systematically spent on things that don't minimally feed the soul. You're selling your days, the fundamental units of your existence, for things that genuinely aren't worth it. You're trading the precious substance of your existence for social appearances, for obligations that aren't even yours, for expectations you never asked to carry. And that when you really stop to think about it, is absolutely tragic. So Seneca asks you a direct and uncomfortable question. Do you know how much time you lost today with things that don't bring you a millimeter closer to who you want to be? How many hours of the last week were spent on activities you can't even remember well, that didn't leave any positive mark on you, that simply evaporated without leaving a trace? And I know the answer is scary when you do that accounting honestly. Because when you really look at how you're spending the most precious resource you have, you realize you're being constantly robbed, not necessarily by other people with bad intentions, but by your own lack of awareness, by your learned inability to protect what should be absolutely sacred. And the reconquest of meaning, the reconstruction of a life worth living, necessarily involves rescuing sovereignty over your own hours. It involves treating each day as what it really is, a finite and irreplaceable part of your existence that deserves to be lived with deliberate intention, not wasted on autopilot, while you wait for real life to start at some future moment that may never come. And maybe this is the most radical change you can make. Start treating your time as what it is, the substance of your life, the raw material of your existence, something too sacred to be thrown away without thinking. And since we're talking about time and finitude so directly, let's move to a Stoic practice that many people consider morbid or depressive, but that's actually deeply liberating when properly understood. Meditation on death. Seneca regularly practiced memento mori, remember that you will die. And no, this isn't nihilistic, it isn't depressive, it isn't a way to ruin life with negative thoughts. It's exactly the opposite. It's an urgent call to wake up completely. Because when you truly remember you're going to die, when you deeply internalize that your time here is brutally limited, something fundamental changes in how you live each day. Suddenly, that silly argument about who's right doesn't seem so important anymore. That social obligation that completely drains you loses its power over you. That job you deeply hate but keep doing because you're paralyzingly afraid to change reveals its true nature, a prison you actively choose every day by not choosing to leave. Acute awareness of finitude cuts through all the superfluous and reveals with brutal clarity what's really essential. It forces you to ask very concretely, if I had only 6 months to live, would I be doing this now? If I knew I was going to die, soon would this be how I'd want to spend my limited time? Would these be the conversations I'd want to have? Would these be the people I'd want to be with? And these questions aren't to unnecessarily distress you, they're to wake you from the trance. Because you're going to die, this isn't a remote and abstract possibility, it's an absolute certainty. And you don't know when. It could be 50 years from now, or it could be tomorrow morning. And if it's tomorrow, do you want today to be another day completely wasted on things that don't matter at all? Or do you want today to be a day lived with total presence, with clear intention, with full awareness of the absurd miracle that is being alive? Death doesn't take away life's meaning, as many think it reveals with surgical precision, where it never truly was. It shows that what you thought was absolutely important maybe never was. It clears all the fog of illusions and lets you see with painful but liberating clarity what's really worthwhile. And that, far from being depressing, is one of the most liberating things you can experience, because it gives you complete permission to stop wasting time on what doesn't matter. It gives you permission to brutally prioritize what's essential. It gives you permission to live as if your days were numbered, because they are, all of them, from the first to the last. And when you live with this awareness, when you carry this reminder of finitude not as weight but as a tool of clarity, your life gains an urgency that isn't desperation but is presence, is intention, is the ability to distinguish what matters from what never mattered. And this leads us directly to the beating heart of Stoic philosophy, the principle that organizes everything else, the dichotomy of control. There's what's under your direct control, and there's what's completely outside of it. Under your control are your thoughts, your attitudes, your efforts, your choices, your responses to events. Outside your control is practically everything else in the universe: other people's behavior, final outcomes, the future, the past, the weather, the economy, other people's opinions about you. And existential anguish grows disproportionately when you try to control the uncontrollable, when you obsessively worry about things that don't depend on you, when you invest precious energy trying to change what simply can't be changed. Seneca teaches with absolute clarity that inner peace comes from investing energy only and exclusively in what genuinely depends on you. And this is an immense relief when you finally truly understand, because it means you can immediately stop blaming yourself for things that are completely beyond your reach. You can stop anguishing over other people's irrational behavior. You can stop trying to control situations that aren't minimally in your hands. You don't need to fix the whole world. You don't need to make everyone understand you perfectly. You don't need to guarantee that everything will work out exactly as you planned. You just need to genuinely do your part. You just need to align your daily actions with your deepest values. You just need to honestly try within what's really within your reach. And the rest you deliver to the universe, to chance, to the natural flow of things, to whatever is conducting this whole mess. And I know perfectly well this can sound like passive resignation, like cowardly surrender, but it's absolutely nothing like that. It's distilled wisdom. It's the crucial difference between swimming exhaustively against an impossible current to beat and swimming strategically in the direction you can effectively control. It's the difference between killing yourself, trying to change what will never change, and investing your limited energy in what's really in your hands. And when you make this separation consciously, when you completely stop wasting force trying to control the uncontrollable, vital energy remains for what really matters. Mental clarity remains to see what you can genuinely do. Inner peace remains to accept with serenity what you can't change. And this doesn't magically solve all the problems of existence, but it makes life infinitely more bearable, more livable, more human. Because you stop fighting windmills and start focusing on what's really within your reach, which is already a lot, already enough to build a life that's worthwhile. And Seneca also advocated something that today we call mindfulness, or present awareness, but that Stoics practiced for centuries under other names: the deliberate practice of consciousness, paying total attention to the present moment, examining one's own thoughts without judgment, but with honesty, living deliberately instead of automatically, because loss of meaning often happens because we live eternally on autopilot, obsessively ruminating on the past that can't be changed, or anxious about the future that doesn't exist yet and may never exist. We're never really here, genuinely present. You're physically present but mentally completely absent, thinking about what you need to do next, revisiting conversations that ended days ago, worried about things that haven't happened yet and may never happen. And meanwhile, life is passing directly through you. The present moment is continuously escaping through your fingers. And the present moment is literally all you truly have. The past is gone, doesn't exist anymore, can't be altered in any way. The future doesn't exist yet, may not even arrive. The only place where you really live, the only time that's genuinely yours, is now. And if you're not paying full attention to now, you're not really living. You're just existing in a perpetual state of distraction, half here, half there, never fully anywhere. So Seneca invites you gently but firmly to return. Return to the present. Do one thing at a time with clear intention, with total consciousness. When you eat, really eat. Notice the flavors, the textures, the experience. When you walk, walk with attention. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice the world around you. When you talk with someone, really be there completely present, not with half your attention on your phone, checking notifications. And he also emphatically defended regular practices of self-reflection, examining your own day, honestly reviewing your own actions without cruel judgment, but with clarity asking, what did I do well today? What could I have done better? How did I use my time? Did I act according to my values or did I betray myself? This type of consistent daily review creates cumulative awareness, creates personal accountability, creates deliberate intention. And when you live with clear intention, when you pay genuine attention to what you're doing and why you're doing it, life naturally gains texture, gains density, gains layers of meaning, because you stop living completely on automatic and start consciously inhabiting your own existence, being an active participant instead of a passive spectator of your own life. And this change from automatism to consciousness is one of the most profound transformations you can experience, because it fundamentally changes your relationship with everything. And now, let's talk about something that's perhaps the organizing core of everything we've talked about so far, the Stoic concept of virtue. Seneca, like every Stoic philosopher, firmly believed that life gains sustainable meaning when you live according to virtue. And what exactly does this mean in practical terms? It means living with genuine courage, consistent justice, applied wisdom, conscious self-control. It means patiently building solid character. It means being a person of integrity, someone whose words correspond to actions, someone who acts according to principles, even when it's inconvenient. And I know perfectly well this can sound antiquated, moralistic, completely out of fashion, in a world that values external achievements above all. But think with me honestly, where exactly does that feeling of emptiness you carry come from? It doesn't come from not having enough achievements, because there are immensely rich and famous people who feel deeply empty. It doesn't come from not having relationships, because there are people surrounded by others who feel completely alone. Emptiness comes primarily from a painful disconnection between who you are and who you'd like to be. It comes from consistently acting in ways you don't respect. It comes from making repeated choices that shame you when you're alone with yourself. It comes from living a life that fundamentally contradicts your own deepest values. And the Stoic solution to this is radical but elegantly simple. Build meaning through virtue, not through volatile external validation. Immediately stop seeking others' approval as the primary source of value. Stop measuring your intrinsic worth by people's changeable opinion. Stop basing your self-esteem on external achievements that can be taken from you at any moment by circumstances outside your control. Instead, patiently build something that absolutely nobody can take from you, your character. Be a person of consistent word. Act with integrity even when nobody's watching. Treat people with genuine respect, regardless of what they can do for you. Face your fears instead of eternally running from them. Admit your mistakes with humility instead of defending them with pride. Live according to what you believe is right, even when it costs you something. And when you do this consistently, when you align your daily actions with your deepest values, something fundamental changes in your relationship with yourself. You may not have everyone's approval, may not be universally admired, may not be successful in conventional terms that society values. But you have something infinitely more valuable. You have genuine self-respect. You have solid internal coherence. You have the rare ability to look in the mirror and recognize with approval the person looking back. And this is a form of deep meaning that absolutely nobody can take from you. External validation is volatile, inconsistent, and fundamentally empty. Internal integrity is solid, lasting, and deeply sustainable. Genuine purpose isn't born from being admired by others. It's born from being coherent with yourself. And when you understand this, when you internalize this truth, you stop chasing approval and start building character. And this change transforms everything. And Seneca also doesn't sell you comforting illusions. He doesn't promise life will get easy if you follow these principles. He doesn't say that if you practice these tools, you'll be happy forever in a permanent state of well-being. No. He's brutally realistic. He says without beating around the bush that life is hard by nature, that suffering is an inevitable part of the human equation, that you're going to lose people you love, you'll face painful disappointments, you'll go through extremely difficult moments. And pretending otherwise, building unrealistic expectations of constant happiness, only exponentially increases the pain. Because then when suffering comes, and it always comes eventually for everyone, you're surprised, indignant, feeling the universe betrayed you personally. But the universe didn't promise absolutely anything. Life didn't promise to be fair or easy. And understanding this, deeply internalizing this hard truth, is paradoxically liberating. Because then you stop uselessly resisting the inevitable. You stop asking with indignation, why is this happening to me? And start asking more productively, what can I do with this? How can I respond to this in a way that preserves my character? You stop expecting life to stop hurting and start systematically developing the strength to cross through the pain without shattering. Seneca doesn't promise constant and unreal happiness. He promises built resilience. He promises you can endure whatever comes. He promises you can find meaning even in the most difficult and apparently meaningless circumstances. And that's much, much more valuable than empty promises of eternal happiness. Because life won't stop being hard. Bad things won't stop happening. But you can absolutely stop breaking every time something bad happens. You can develop the rare capacity to bend under pressure without breaking completely to suffer, without irreparably shattering to cross the dark valley, knowing deeply that you have within you what it takes to reach the other side, still whole, still functioning, still capable of finding beauty and meaning. And this strength, this resilience, doesn't come from avoiding suffering. It comes from crossing through it consciously. It comes from facing pain head on and choosing how you'll respond to it. And to do all this deep inner work, you need space. You need genuine silence. Seneca deeply valued solitude, not as depressive isolation or cowardly escape, but as vital necessity for anyone who wants to live consciously. Regular moments of withdrawal to reconnect with yourself, to think clearly away from noise, to strengthen yourself internally before returning to the world. Because when life loses meaning, it's often because you're completely saturated with incessant external noise. You're constantly surrounded by opinions, expectations, demands, information stimuli that never stop. And in the middle of all that, you can't hear your own inner voice. You can't know what you really think about things, what you really feel deeply, what you really want for your life. So you need to deliberately step away, temporarily, not forever, not as permanent escape, but enough to clear your mind, to reorganize thoughts, to find yourself again underneath all the layers of noise and expectations that have been accumulating over the years. And I know perfectly well that solitude frightens many people deeply. Because when you get genuinely alone with yourself, when you don't have constant distractions, when you can't flee to your phone or to some activity, you need to face things you've been carefully avoiding. You need to feel feelings you've been pushing under the rug. You need to admit truths about yourself and about your life that you've been denying with all your strength. But it's precisely because of this that solitude is absolutely essential for anyone who wants to live authentically. Because you can't honestly fix what you refuse to face. You can't solve real problems you pretend don't exist. You can't genuinely reconnect with yourself if you're constantly running from yourself. So Seneca invites you to deliberately create this sacred space of reorganization. It could be half an hour per day. It could be a weekend per month. It could be whatever is genuinely possible within your real life. But create this space consciously. Protect this space ferociously. Use this space to return to yourself, to ask yourself, how am I really? What am I feeling underneath all the distractions? Am I living according to my values? Or am I betraying myself? Because without this regular space for reflection, you'll inevitably keep living the life others want you to live eternally, responding to the world's demands, never really stopping to ask, but what about me? What do I really want? Who do I want to be? How do I want to live the days I have left? And when you create this space, when you start asking these difficult questions, you discover something important and comforting. You discover that reconstruction doesn't necessarily happen in big, dramatic revolutions. It happens primarily in small, consistent adjustments. Seneca doesn't ask you to turn your life completely upside down overnight. He doesn't ask for impossible transformations. He asks for daily, sustainable, and consistent adjustments. When life loses meaning, genuine reconstruction happens step by step. An honest conversation you've been postponing out of fear. A necessary no. You finally have the courage to say. A recovered hour you consciously invest in something that really matters to you. A harmful habit you finally eliminate after years of intention without action. They're micro decisions, apparently small, that gradually restore autonomy. They're small daily choices that accumulate over time and completely transform the direction and quality of your life. And this is deeply comforting when you understand, because it means you don't need to have courage to do everything at once. You don't need to be heroic and brave enough for a giant and scary transformation. You just need to have enough courage for one small change today, and another tomorrow, and another the day after. Maybe you start simply by waking up half an hour earlier to have genuine time with yourself before the world starts making its infinite demands. Maybe you turn off phone notifications to recover a bit of mental peace and control over your attention. Maybe you politely decline a social invitation that doesn't nourish you minimally to have preserved energy for something that really matters. Maybe you finally have that difficult conversation that's needed to be said for months. They're apparently small things, but each one is a concrete act of retaking control. Each one is a way of clearly saying, I'm consciously choosing, I'm actively deciding, I'm in command of my life. And when you do this repeatedly, when you accumulate these small daily victories, something profound changes in your relationship with your own existence. You start to feel you're genuinely living your life, not the life that was imposed on you by circumstances or expectations. And this doesn't magically solve everything, but it solves much more than you imagine. And there's another specific Stoic practice that can help tremendously in this reconstruction process, something Seneca called negative gratitude. It's not the conventional and superficial gratitude of simply being thankful for what you have. It's something much deeper and transformative. It's deliberately imagining the loss of what you have to fully value it while it's still here. Seneca did this constantly as a regular practice. He imagined losing the people he loved, losing the health he had, losing the freedom he enjoyed. Not out of morbid masochism, but to wake up completely to the value of what already exists in your life now. Because often, life seems completely empty because we're obsessively focused on what's missing. We're always looking at the next step we haven't reached yet, at the next achievement we don't have yet, at what's still missing to finally be complete. And we completely ignore, we take for granted what's already working reasonably well. The people already in our lives, the health we still have, the freedom to make choices, the ability to think, feel, experience reality. They're things we only painfully notice when we lose them. So Stoics strategically proposed anticipating this perception, imagining loss before it really happens to deeply value presence while it still exists. And this isn't at all being pessimistic or negative. It's being deeply realistic. Because you're going to lose these things eventually. Everyone loses. The people you love will die, or you'll die first. Health doesn't last forever. Circumstances inevitably change. So instead of waiting for loss to painfully wake up before, by your own choice. Consciously look at what you have now and recognize clearly that this won't last forever. Nothing lasts. And let this acute awareness make you genuinely appreciate the present. Let it make you more present in conversations with people you love. Let it make you deeply value simple moments. Let it show you that maybe you already have much more than you imagine when you stop focusing only on what's missing. And consciously recognizing what's already working isn't passive conformism. It isn't giving up on improving or growing. It's creating a solid foundation of gratitude. It's impossible to build a genuinely meaningful life if you're constantly in a state of scarcity, feeling you have nothing. You need to recognize and value what already sustains your life now to then consciously build on top of that. And all of this we've talked about so far inevitably leads us to the final synthesis, to the point where all these ideas converge in a single understanding. Life only makes sense when you consciously decide it does. Seneca repeatedly reminds us that meaning isn't passively discovered as if it were hidden somewhere waiting for you to find it. It's actively created. Nobody's going to deliver ready-made purpose to you wrapped with a bow. Nobody's going to show up with a definitive manual saying do exactly this, and your life will have guaranteed meaning. You need to consciously define what living well specifically means for you. You need to ferociously protect that meaning from the world's constant invasions. You need to consistently live according to what you defined, even when it's extremely difficult, even when nobody around you understands, even when it would be infinitely easier to return to comfortable autopilot. And this requires hard and continuous work, requires constant awareness, requires renewed courage, requires you to genuinely take command of your own life instead of passively letting it be commanded by external forces that don't care what you want. And the answer to the initial question, what to do when life loses meaning, isn't complicated in theory, but also isn't at all easy in practice. Deliberately take command. Cut the excess without mercy. Live with clear intention. Consistently align your actions with your deepest values. Treat time as the most precious and irreplaceable resource you have. Regularly remember you're going to die and let that wake you up to what really matters. Control only what's genuinely within your reach and completely release the rest. Live with consistent virtue instead of incessantly seeking external validation. Accept that suffering is an inevitable part of life and develop strength to cross through it without shattering. Create regular spaces of solitude to find yourself again. Make small, sustainable adjustments every day. Consciously value what you already have. And above all, understand deeply that you are the main author of your story. Life stops making sense when you stop being the one writing the pages, when you hand over the pen for others to decide for you, when you passively live the script they wrote for you without consulting you, when you just mechanically react instead of deliberately acting. Seneca gives you back the pen. He firmly reminds you that you can write, that you should write, that life is patiently waiting for you to consciously decide what it means to you. And maybe you don't know exactly where to start. Maybe you're genuinely scared of the responsibility. Maybe you feel you've already wasted too much time and it's too late. But you're still here breathing. You still have days ahead. How many you don't know, but you have them. You can still choose. And this choice, this courageous decision to take the reins of your own existence, is exactly where meaning begins to be born and develop. It won't be easy, it won't be quick, it won't be linear, but it will be worth it. Because the alternative is to keep living a life that isn't yours, keep waking up with that emptiness in your chest, keep feeling something is fundamentally wrong. And you deserve more than that. You deserve to live a life that's genuinely yours, a life that when you look back, you can say it was worth it. I did it my way. I lived according to my values. I was coherent with myself. And that, Seneca would say, is all that really matters in the end. If you made it this far and something in all this made sense to you, subscribe to the channel, leave your thumbs up, and comment. What makes sense to you?